This is a GK Media podcast. Alexandra Dotcheva, thank you so much for joining me today on Garry Talks. You are a registered nurse. You own 3 real estate companies. You're a holistic coach, and you're also an author. Your book is It Really Is Simple, a holistic approach to self-confidence. A book that we'll talk about shortly, which is available everywhere. It's on Amazon, Apple Books, and available on your website also. That's a diverse range of roles, isn't it? Nurse, real estate.
Yes, Garry, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's such a pleasure to be here. Wearing many hats surely can be a challenge. However, in my case, it was very beneficial because I needed that challenge 15 years ago, gradually to get into the real world from a musician's world, because I'm not sure if I mentioned, but I was a professional violinist for 29 years before I entered the workforce as a nurse. So that came with a different set of challenges that mostly self-imposed, and then learning the other areas was really, really eye-opening as to how many possibilities there are in a human life, which I didn't suspect before as a musician.
And, you know, your book focuses on building or rebuilding one's self-confidence. As a musician, and you're performing in front of people, surely one would expect that a musician would have so much confidence, because it takes a lot to go up and perform in front of a room of strangers.
Yes, but unfortunately in my case that didn't quite pan out that way. I did have many struggles with self-confidence and self-esteem as a musician, because as I was growing up, I knew that there were people who were better than me. Although I spent many hours in the practice room, Garry, I was practicing anywhere between 7 to 11 hours a day, from the 8th grade forward. Before that, it was like 4 hours when I was a child. But it didn't, somehow my confidence in the practice room did not really come out on stage the way I wanted. And I went through many nervous breakdowns because of that. And some of it was also self-inflicted, because when you're not feeling secure on stage and you crave the attention and compliments of others rather than really focusing on the real problems in your performance, which I was afraid to do. Normally, of course, for a teenager in early 20s. And so then the problem solidified further professionally, even though I earned bachelor's, master's, doctoral degrees in music. And actually the latter 2 were in the United States, because I'm Bulgarian originally. I did make quite a bit of progress in the States, but at the end of the day, I knew I was not competitive enough to survive as a musician after 26 years of only doing that and no other knowledge. That was the worst part, because when you enter it professionally with musicians' parents, when there is not much room for negotiation as a child, whether you like it or not, you limit yourself, because you go into a specialized music school for 12 years and then another 11 years in academy for the 3 big degrees. And many musicians who would love to do something different, I know that because I've spoken with many musicians who don't, they're not like Yo-Yo Ma sharing Heifetz at that level of players. But we're afraid, because all we've done for decades is music. We don't know anything else about the world, and no science-based, nothing else. And we don't believe we can advance in other careers. And that's just sad, because
and is this all growing up in Bulgaria?
Yeah, 24 years in Bulgaria.
So this behind the Iron Curtain then, that you're being indoctrinated as a musician as such, is it?
Well, the Iron Curtain, that fell when I was 13 though. Then democracy came, and that's where the big problem was, because Garry, classical music really became a smaller and smaller priority to the governments that came, and horrible branches of music came, like genres that were very low bass, really the chalga, so-called. It's a type of a pop music combined with the folklore. It's neither good pop music nor good folklore music, but it's all very heavily oriented towards the most primal instincts of humanity, because that was suppressed during socialism. So it came out with full force, and later on they ended up cutting many orchestras and ton of funding for the arts. So I was programmed to basically go abroad and study abroad and all that. So yeah, I came abroad, but I was very fortunate to land in the United States. But again, the damage to my mindset was already done, because I had been having lots of problems with stage fright. And much as I tried to overcome those, it really didn't come the way I wanted it. And when the orchestra started bankrupting in the United States between 2006 and 2008 with the financial crisis, then it was time to make some important decisions for my future. I was 32, went through a very early midlife crisis.
So did you not enjoy your 20s at all?
No, I enjoyed the 20s, but I didn't like professionally because I was very ambitious. I mean, like I said, I was never lazy. However, for the amount of work I put, the results I got were extremely discouraging for me and angering. And I was very much self-deprecating myself, and to the point of self-humiliation, that to believe I was really unfit to do anything properly, because if I couldn't master a career that I was spending so much time on, what other hope was there for me? I mean, think about it. It's just really, by the time you're 25, 30, you have already spent 20 years in a career, or 25 in some cases if you start on the age 3 or 4. I was 6 when I started. But at that point, after so much experience behind you, most people think of retirement, and we're barely starting our careers auditioning for these orchestras where you compete against 40 to 500 people, depending on how prestigious the orchestra is. And this can be very sort of mill. It's a really psychological mill you go through. And if you're enduring it strong, you get it. If you're not so enduring, you don't. It's just simple as that.
But you're obviously good as a musician because you're at it for over 20 years. But is it that in your head you were bad, but you were still getting paid, you're still getting gigs?
I was getting gigs, but I couldn't score a full-time position. And that I knew that when you start cutting orchestras in a country, then you have fewer orchestras and even more hungry musicians. And I knew that my brain was able of studying and learning other things. And I wanted to give it a chance because I realized I was going to regret deeply 30 years from 2008 if I didn't give myself a chance to start something from scratch and get away with all this mentality of defeat and fear of failure and fear of performance. I had to start something very new, and nursing was an excellent option because it's a highly respected profession, high demand for nurses anywhere in the world. And 3 to 4 years of college, which again was unbelievable. How do you become a professional in 4 years if I couldn't do it in 26 years? But I changed my mindset. I became very afraid of poverty because I was 32 years old, believe it or not. In the United States, I was making less than $18,000 a year. And I looked at myself in the mirror and told myself, you've been in the States already 8 years and you are barely making ends meet. You're an idiot. You're a financial idiot, and that needs to stop. So it was a very mean self-talk, as always. But this one was more grounding in terms of just to really understand reality was what it was. And you have to work with it, and then you learn anything you can for the shortest time period because you've missed so much being digging yourself into this one art, right? That wasn't even meant to be for you. So you wake up at some point and go up from that point on.
Do you hold resentment or anger even towards your parents for bringing you into this area that, you know, you look back on at the age of 32 or so and said that was just a frustrating possible waste of time?
I absolutely don't blame my parents. They had the very best intentions because during socialism, being a classical musician was a big deal, and you could find excellent positions in Europe. You didn't even have to go as far as the United States because Europe had amazing orchestras, and they really wanted me. I was very musical. And they were both, my mother is the most renowned music critic in Bulgaria. Okay. So growing up with that was a little challenging to say the least, but no, it was bad enough that they blamed themselves greatly when they realized I wanted to become a nurse. They were petrified. And, they said, this is one of the hardest professions. Do you realize what human suffering means? You have no idea. I said, no, I have no idea. And that's exactly why I want to do it, because I have no idea. But they felt extremely guilty. And I told them, it's not your fault, guys. It's all my decision. I could have decided this when I was 18, but I was too afraid to do it. And not because of you guys. It's because I was a coward. And no, I never blame my parents. I know they had the best intentions and they helped me the best they could when I was growing up as a musician, because they were both very knowledgeable about music. It's just that I just didn't do it right, and it happens often.
Yeah, and I suppose it's it's difficult in one's life as well when you grow up and you're defined by something. And it is that question that one comes to, I suppose, during their 20s, if it's not giving the return that one expected, either success-wise or financially, of saying, okay, maybe this isn't who I am.
Yeah.
And it's taking that leap. I suppose it's that acceptance, and it's then trying to figure out what exactly one wants to do, really do, or will be good at doing, so they don't kind of put another number of years and hope into something that, again, doesn't bring them the results they hope for. So,
Exactly.
Becoming a nurse is so different from a musician. What was that process like for you then? Because it's a complete flip on what you were doing.
Well, for one thing, I really craved of being useful to people in a different way than when I was a musician. And I didn't feel I was at all useful to society as a musician, especially when our orchestra bankrupted. But by then I already had a job waiting for me in the ICU upon graduation from nursing school, because I saw the writing on the wall in 2008 and we bankrupted the Syracuse Symphony in 2011. But a nurse, you can put your ego aside and really dedicate yourself to the actual needs of somebody who is very sick or dying. And that attracted me. Plus, I love biology. So when I switched to nursing school with the prerequisite classes and everything, I just did what I knew best how to do. Instead of practicing 9-12 hours a day, I started reading the textbooks 9 to 12 hours a day. It was interesting because 7 o'clock were the classes. I sometimes read until 3 a.m. these textbooks, because I read most of them, the thick books, 3 or 4 times before these semesters even started, so I could build my scientific vocabulary, especially in English. And I aced all the classes. I nailed everything, but it took truly a lot of dedication. And I don't regret at all that switch, but I knew I was going to succeed if I studied. And when you're in an apartment, the way I was at the time, there is no noise restriction to reading as there was to playing the violin. So I understood, I can read 24/7 if I have to. I will never show up unprepared for an exam. And that's exactly what happened. That was like the straw that you grab on when you're drowning. And it was a very comforting thought. Whatever you do, you can read 24/7. You don't have to sleep. I was working also 3 jobs at the side to support myself. And it worked. There were 3 difficult years, but I came through, and the rest is history.
Wow. You come off so strong, determined, self-disciplined. But I wonder as well, are you very hard on yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I'm from the Balkan Peninsula. We're not nice to people or to ourselves. And I had to be, because the way I was raised, I was a stubborn child. My parents were equally stubborn. So when things there was no mutual agreement, and there was some physical, not like bad balance, but my parents spanked me till I was 8, and then of course when they stopped spanking me, throughout my puberty, throughout my 20s, they always, on any occasion, they could say they stopped spanking me way too early. Right. So once I was across the ocean, it was even harder to spank me. But you have to be hard on yourself when you are afraid of failure and you realize that has been the wrong mentality all over. And in this case, it helps to be hard on myself, because then you put a little thread of self-encouragement. And now, of course, with the years, in the last 15, 16 years, I have learned to be very nice to myself. But again, in a very firm way. And when you wobble with your mentality, especially when you have a history of self-deprivation, of self-esteem and self-confidence, you have to be a little more firm with yourself to tell you, okay, you did this, you're going to be able to do this now. And that was exactly the case when I started learning finance to become a real estate investor, because I wanted to expand my finances beyond, the career is to be really useful to people, but then the financial aspect is you need to grow assets that produce cash flow for generations, so you have more choices in life. Because the nursing profession is very difficult. However, difficult and in demand as it is, job security is still a myth. And I learned this very quickly when I entered the workforce as a nurse. So then I started studying the financial part. And again, I had to be very hard on myself, because I started reading the books of Robert Kiyosaki with the Rich Dad Company, one of his most famous books, and I couldn't even grasp 75%.
Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah, 75% of the vocabulary he was using, I had no clue what he was talking about. And Robert is excellent at explaining things difficult things in a simple way to idiots like me, the way I was at that point, and I couldn't understand 75%, and I got really scared. And then I told myself, hey, you learned nursing, you learned science and medicine that you had no clue about, so you're now both intimidated by financial jargon. Sit in your butt and learn it and do this. So that's how I operate my mindset, especially 10 years ago, because I was very easily distraught by problems, by things not going my way. And I had to overcome that mindset in order to make any progress in my life.
But is that what is wrong with a lot of us today, that we're not hard enough on ourselves, that we like to be too comfortable?
We are hard on ourselves in the wrong way. Like when I was a musician, I was hard on myself in the very wrong way. Instead of focusing on the real problems, I would, be hard in front of people for different things that I knew were not the biggest problems in my life. And that's how I got all the compliments, because, oh, no, but this is so nice. Well, that was really not the problem I had. If you are really honest with yourself and develop high level of integrity towards yourself, and you know what that means to you, because it's different to everybody, then you will be able to be brave and focus and resolve the real problems in your life. And they're usually in every aspect of life, whether it's health or in your spiritual existence or in your career or in your finances or your relationships. We have problems in all these areas of life. But if we face the real issues in these 5 areas and work on them methodically with a plan, given that we have specific goals in all these areas, it is completely doable. And you can be hard on yourself, but only if it's in the right direction, that you're really going to solve a problem. If you're just digging yourself into a hole for the sake of avoiding a problem, then that's not a good way to be hard on yourself.
And going back to Robert's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he talks about the quadrant. So there's the self-employed, there's the business owner. Yeah. One is the investor. I can't remember what the fourth one is.
First is the employed. First is the E quadrant, the employed.
Oh, yeah, that's
then
right.
It's the self-employed. Then you pay even more taxes than if you're employed. Then it's the business, and then it's the investor. Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah. It's a fascinating book and theory that he has. And often people might go from employed to self-employed to then becoming a business owner where they have other people employed. But a lot of people find the transition hard to investor. And as I was saying there, like you own 3 real estate companies.
Yes, I do.
And for those listening, Alexandra lives in Arizona.
Yes, very investment-friendly state.
That's mad. 3 different businesses. And they're all the same industry.
They're really a rental real estate, yes. I mean, you want to put them in a LLC or other company if it's more appropriate, because it's for tax and legal protection mainly. And this is the purpose of that, because when you have any expenses with renovations and repairs of these properties, so you can increase the quality of living for the residents in them, you have to do a tax write-off. And an LLC or an PLC, limited partnership, whatever, however if you have partners, there are many entities that you can put your businesses in, depending on how it's best for tax and legal protection. So this is why you do it. And again, I learned this from the Roberts classes, because before I paid for any of his mentorship, I read 7 of his books so I can trust that he would teach me. And it was extremely tempting to buy all of his really coachings, the business, the real estate, and the stock coaching. But I was financially limited at the time. I was a beginning nurse, and it truly grew on me, that idea about rental real estate, because he's big on that. He owns 8,000 rental units, and it convinced me that I could do it, because he started from nowhere too. He was poor when he started. And if he can do this, I don't need to own 8,000 units, because I don't necessarily want to deal with management companies. Because work ethic is very different in different areas and different professions and generations, especially. But I can become an investor and grow from there and see. So that was encouraging. But yeah, you just have to study a lot, and his books were great. And the transition from employed to self-employed it's all the tax implications, because taxes are the biggest expense. And I know you guys in Europe pay horrendous taxes, right?
Yeah, it's different per country. Yeah. So like certainly up around Norway and so up in Scandinavia, the tax on income is very high, but people will argue in Ireland the tax on income is also very high. It can go up to almost 50%
That's
based on
ridiculous,
whether you cross over the threshold.
Well, it
Yeah.
depends on the type of income, right? Because it's the earned income
Yeah.
versus the passive income versus the portfolio income, and that makes a huge difference how you're
Yeah.
taxed.
And so did you just do loads of saving and then get loans and go off and purchase properties?
For the first property, I didn't even have to save a lot because I got a loan that required a very minimal down payment as a first-time homeowner under the condition that I lived on the property. So I bought a multifamily property. And we lived in one of the apartments and rented the rest. So as a beginning, I was a tenant for 14 years before I bought this very first property. And
were you living there on your own?
With my boyfriend. And
okay.
It was interesting because beginning investors say, oh yeah, start small. Well, I started with a fourplex. So I quadrupled my problems before I even had any. And of course, we found a property that wasn't really a rescue. It was an okay property, but the owner was an absentee. And he had been treating the tenants like dogs on this property. So we had to renovate the apartments where they lived, and we didn't renovate ours at all. It was in the same miserable shape as the others, but we lived there for a year and a half before we bought our actual house. Then we renovated that whole apartment and put another set of family tenants there. It was a gradual learning curve, steep, very steep, because you have to budget like there is no tomorrow when you're renovating 3 apartments on a beginning nursing salary. So yeah, that time I don't regret it in the past. But it helped tremendously with the next investments, because once you have such a steep learning curve at the beginning, every other deal and purchase and renovation is a breeze, basically. So it was great.
And you don't have management companies operating those properties?
Not at this point, because we're very resourceful with my boyfriend. We've been together almost 17 years now, and he taught me how to paint. I had no clue how to paint walls, trim, doors, nothing. I was a musician. Remember, I knew nothing else, but, it saves you a lot of money the more skills you have. And if you have the patience and budget your time properly and your money, you can do a very good professionally looking work. And of course, the heavy contractor work, I call the plumbers, the electricians, all these specialties. But as far as the things that anybody can do that most people refuse to do, we don't mind doing that at all. And because we are able to keep our prices really, really reasonable. I mean, we have now the best priced house in the entire Phoenix Valley compared to everybody else. So we keep tenants 7, 8, 9 years, and they stay.
And is there a huge housing crisis in Arizona like there is in Ireland? So there's a high demand, but a low supply of houses.
Well,
in
they
Ireland
build
at the
all
moment.
the time. The problem is there are all these extremely rich companies that are building complexes to rent, because that's a very rent-oriented elite. But they own like atrocious amounts of properties. And that's why part of my coaching is encourage people to buy their own properties to rent, because we need to balance the market. So not everybody becomes rentals, because then nobody can control the prices when everything is rental.
Yeah.
And I just will never understand why things are sold so expensively when they really are worth like 3 times less because of the so-called demand. I mean, people, they have these houses. See, I come from a very poor place. We were sharing a bedroom, my parents and I, for years. So when I get a house that I can comfortably live with one more person, I don't crave a bigger and bigger and bigger and more expensive house. And that's how bubbles happen, because people say, oh yeah, that's wonderful for your first home. So what do you mean my first home? I either have a home, that's it. What do you mean first, second, third, fourth, fifth home? And I see these people's houses, how expensive they get, and more higher standard, which they absolutely don't need to live a very decent life. But they just keep buying in the same craziness with the debt over and over again, and 30-year loans. And it's just exactly a rat race, as Robert Kiyosaki says, because it never ends. And they don't invest. They just buy for themselves, and they get in these debt pits. And financially, it's, my God, it's incredible.
Yeah. And it's possibly going down that road again, especially here in Ireland. I want to talk about your book because, there's a lot of people, and I certainly think since COVID as well, who lost their confidence. They've low self-esteem, they're socially awkward and so on. And like it's it's a big book in the sense of like there's over 400 pages in this book, so it's not a little pamphlet or anything here that you've put a lot of work into your book. It really is simple. You go through so many things, even through the chapters you're talking about, healthy eating, quality nutrition, building the magic detoxification, clearing your mind, financial health, financial growth, the role of relationships in building your self-esteem. We obviously aren't able to go through everything that's in the book, and that's why we would encourage people to actually take the time out, invest in themselves, and in fairness, the price of the book is extremely reasonable, I have to say.
Because it's the ebook that's available abroad. Unfortunately, the paperback is just so much more expensive to ship. But yeah, the book is slightly under 400 pages, the paperback, and the ebook is a little bigger because the pages are, smaller. But it is very affordable. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk to me. Can I give us some foundational tips in terms of what one should start doing to improve their self-confidence?
So the book came because people started asking lots of questions, not just my patients and friends and relatives, but like strangers in the grocery store. Hey, how do you maintain this physical shape? And then my friend said, how do you manage to do this profession and then the investing and staying in physical shape and so healthy and your time management? So lots of questions emerged. And then I thought, what would have been something I would love to have been able to read 15 years ago? And immediately the structure of the book, of course, came because I used the same principles and systems in my health, in my spirituality, in my career, in my finances, in terms of investing, and then in the relationships, of course, because whoever you're with influences your other decisions, health, finances, and career, and spiritual. So what we can do, and we should do, you really shouldn't neglect any of these life aspects if you want to be a holistically confident person. And in my case, I was fortunate with all the things I chose to do because as a nurse, I didn't mention that, but it was a huge cultural shock when I became a nurse, seeing healthcare professionals morbidly obese, sick with chronic diseases, carrying every disease known to man, eating horrible food. And I thought I can't be that type of health professional and then I saw the lost credibility among the patients towards the healthcare system. And they're saying, well, these doctors are smoking, these nurses are 100 pounds overweight, what the heck, And I said, I'm not going to be that type of nurse. Absolutely not. And so I had stopped eating meat in 2000, but in 2017, we became whole food organic vegan, both my boyfriend and I. He's an emergency room nurse for 30 years. He has seen everything. But whole foods organic vegan, perfectly healthy. We are both exercise freaks. So, and martial artists. Then the detox was the other aspect that we integrated in our life on a daily basis. So that's the health aspect. And that's what I teach my patients as a home care nurse, going from home to home. Every patient, I work for a home care company. And you have to serve as an example to the people you work with if you want them to believe you. So this health is huge. So that was a big part of the book, 5 chapters. Obviously, I'm so biased as a nurse. Then the other aspect of spirituality, several things. How to clear your mind, how to inspire your mind so you nourish your mind, and how to maintain your sanity throughout the problems that happen in spite of your plans. So this is spirituality, very, very simplified. And then the other aspect is the career, how to be useful to society in spite of your ego, and the finances, how to grow your money that you keep after you earn it in cash flowing assets that can give you the choice to work or not to work. Because you have the choice to work or not to work. Actually, the work isn't that hard anymore. Because you can leave at any time comfortably, and nobody can step on your neck and make you do things that you think are ethically inappropriate in your profession. So that's a huge thing, especially in the COVID. We know what happened, how people lost their jobs for 2 main reasons. And I thought that was completely unacceptable. And thankfully, my employer was smart enough not to force people to do certain things, although to an extent they did. But I told them, look, I have 7 other streams of income, 8 actually, by the time they were already more than that. And I said, you guys can do whatever you want, but this is the way I'm treating my body, and period. So that was okay. I got very fortunate with that. And then, of course, the relationship aspect. But all these aspects needs to be worked on very diligently, because if you don't have financial freedom, then you don't have the choices, and people can manipulate you, and you do things that you don't want to do. And the problem is people are intimidated by financial jargon, and they're afraid to invest, or they invest in things that are like more fake assets. Like Robert Kiyosaki says, the stock market, lots of fake assets instead of the tangible assets that you can actually touch, sell, buy, and the real thing. And so it really boils down to the laziness of mindset, indolence of mind, because these generations, they just love getting everything fast and quick, and not put much work into it. That's a big problem. But that has always been a problem, Gary. It's not just in the information age. There have always been people who hate to work, and people who have no fear of work and can build anything they want at any time. Even if they lose it all today, they'll rebuild it again tomorrow and the day after.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, because I see a lot of that, and I think YouTube is certainly becoming a catalyst for people wanting to become rich or famous very quickly without actually putting in the hard work and effort. You just, talking about the approach to building self-confidence, a lot of what you were saying at the start was got to do with nearly healing and rebuilding your body. Is that a huge part of it?
Well, depending on the problems, you have the body and your mindset. Extremely important. They're connected. They just don't go together. But if you have chronic diseases, you have to reverse them if you want to accomplish better things in your life. Because if you're really aspiring to have your own business, you have to be in perfect health. Because if you start from scratch with not much money like I did, and like many other very successful people have in the past, you need to have the physical stamina and mental stamina to do the work that it takes. And like I said, I told you, I learned how to paint apartments and houses. Well, sometimes I buy a house, I paint from 7 o'clock in the morning until 7:30 in the evening with a 15-minute break for 2 apples in the middle. So to have that endurance, you need to be very healthy. Okay. And to be healthy, that's a lifelong commitment. So on a daily basis, you do things that other people won't do because they hate it. Of course, the diet discipline is huge. Exercise discipline is huge. Detox discipline, equally huge in today's contamination, environmental and food and water and everything, right? The health. And then the work ethic with everything else is just as important. Okay. So time management, huge with everything, because otherwise you won't be able to keep on track with all these 5 aspects and keep them at elevated at all times. To not neglect anything in your life for the sake of something that is not as important or driving you in a downward direction. So it's a constant game of prioritization and integrity.
So finally, what would you say to someone listening to this podcast right now who just feels really low in themselves?
It's a great time in your life for a change. You have to explore really what you really want and not be afraid of what you want, and say it, write it, pronounce it, understand it. It's okay to dream big, even if you're very low in your life right now, because the big dreams are what drag you upward if you keep perspective. And sometimes you have to have seemingly crazy goals that you think you can't accomplish, but eventually you'll surprise yourself that you can accomplish. I'll give you a very simple example with my fitness routine. After doing martial arts for 12 years intensely, I hit the gym very intensely. But in martial arts, we never did pull-ups or dips. And I was 41. I put myself a goal to be able to perform 100 pull-ups in a single gym session. It took me 1.5 years to accomplish that goal. But I'm now able to perform 100 full range of motion pull-ups. And sometimes I even add weights between my ankles to do these pull-ups. And somebody said, well, why 100 when you can't even do 2? And I said, because that's a really attractive goal. And I want to strive towards it. And I put every effort at the gym to get to that goal. And I did that. And once you can do 100 pull-ups after you're past the age of 40, you can do anything, basically. So that's how this works with everything in your life. So if you're low right now, read books by people who have been low just like you. See how they succeeded. Your story will be different. Your story will always be different. And that's okay. But you will become more resourceful. You will learn to see opportunities around you and use these opportunities to the best of your ability. And it's a constant learning process, but it's if you make that decision now, you will be very grateful to yourself 5 years from now, and not to mention 10 years. Never underestimate what you can do in a 5 to 10 to 15 year period. But don't expect to do it all in 1 year, because then you will be disappointed again and you will probably give up, and that's really not worth it.
Well, I would love to have you in my physical circle of friends because you're such a motivator and you're so inspiring. You're amazing, Alexandra.
Thank you, Garry. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well done in all that you have achieved and continue achieving for both yourself and in supporting others. It really is simple. A Holistic Approach to Self-Confidence is the name of the book, available on Amazon, Apple Books, if you're in the States, Barnes and Nobles. But if you go to the website, holisticselfconfidence.com, you can also purchase the book from there and find out more as well about the amazing Alexandra. Again, thank you so much for joining me today on Garry Talks.
Thank you, Garry, for having me. It was really a pleasure talking with you.